Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. Today's focus for our screencast is going to be uh, the early Washington administration, and really we're going to focus on domestic issues facing the nation, and really how the Washington administration tries to solve these domestic problems and kind of the disputes that come out of Washington's cabinet. So we're going to start with really how Washington himself gets elected. Now, when you look at the electoral maps of 1788 and 1792, we have a presidential election coming up this year, and I'd be totally shocked if we found an electoral map that looks similar to what you see here on your screen with George Washington and the first presidential election. And the same thing is true in 1792. If you look on the screen here, every single state that's in play, George Washington is going to win the majority of votes in every state, meaning he wins unanimously all electoral votes for the election of 1788 and the election of 1792. First president to do it and the last president to do it. No president after George Washington unanimously wins all the states and all the electoral votes. After this, there's more partisanship, and people are not as united behind one single candidate. Most of the founding fathers at the Constitutional Convention, when they wrote the Constitution and they designed the executive branch, they had George Washington in mind. And so it was kind of something that they all expected for George Washington to become the first president of the United States. Now, when he does become the first president of the United States, if you look at the section of the Constitution that describes the executive branch, describes the presidency, there's not a ton of detail in that section. It delineates the powers, it gives the powers to the president, but they purposefully leave the running of the executive branch kind of open-ended. And the reason for that is what I said. They expected George Washington to be the first president, and they trusted him. They entrusted him to make the right decisions for the executive branch. And when Washington becomes the president, he's able to kind of really shape how the executive branch is run. And he sets a lot of the precedents for how presidents do things and how the executive branch functions on a day-to-day basis. So we refer to this, historians refer to this as the Unwritten Constitution, meaning the Constitution delegates certain powers to the federal government. Certain powers are delegated to the legislative branch. Certain powers are delegated to the executive branch, and so on, to the judicial branch. There are a lot of things that are done in the federal government that aren't necessarily delineated by the Constitution. At this point in our history, they've become kind of custom. They've become something that's been set through precedent, set through what past people have done. And for the executive branch, nobody shapes the executive branch like George Washington, because Washington really is the author of what we're going to call the Unwritten Constitution. It's not a formal document, it's just kind of the way that he runs the executive branch. So there are a couple of things that Washington does that people follow as far as precedent, domestically and foreign policy-wise. So the first thing you want to take a look at for Unwritten Constitution is going to be Washington is going to be the first person to create and use a cabinet to help him govern the executive branch. So you're looking at his three-man cabinet. You have down here with the $2 bill, Thomas Jefferson, who is his Secretary of State, meaning he deals with foreign affairs. Up here you have Alexander Hamilton, who's his Secretary of the Treasury, and he deals with the financial matters of the country. And over here you have Henry Knox, who is his Secretary of War, dealing with matters of defense for the country. Now, of the three men, all of them have substantial roles in Washington's administration, but I would say really Hamilton has the biggest role, because Hamilton, if you remember, under the Articles of Confederation, we're dealing with the financial crisis. And so Hamilton has to address this financial crisis and really has to figure out some way to kind of solve it. Now, the cabinet's important for a lot of different reasons. The first one being, again, it's a part of the Unwritten Constitution. And every president after Washington is going to create a cabinet. Now, in our upcoming presidential election, if Donald Trump or Hillary Clinton decided that they wanted to eliminate certain branches of the cabinet or get rid of a lot of people who work for the executive branch, they have the ability to do that. It's entirely under their discretion, and they don't really have to ask Congress to do things like that. So Washington creates this cabinet. Now, what we're going to get into really within the cabinet, some major things start to develop, and it's going to spill out into larger American society. The two people that really have differing opinions within the cabinet are Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. And they're going to essentially form our first two political parties through their dialogue, through their disputes, really within Washington's cabinet. So our first two political parties are not the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. Our first two political parties are the Federalist Party and what's known as the Democratic Republican Party. Or they sometimes refer to it as the Jeffersonian Republicans. So you have the first two political parties. Now, what is the dispute over? What is the difference between the two political parties? This is key, I think, to understanding the next 20, 25 years of history in American history, is understanding the differences of the political parties, where they're coming from, why they're coming from, these varying different perspectives. So the first political party, the Federalists. So when you look at the Federalist Party, what the Democratic Republicans and the Federalists are arguing over at this point is interpretation of the Constitution. So that's a big deal. I will write that down, highlight it, put a star next to it. The disagreement is over interpretation of the Constitution. The Federalist Party is going to believe in what's known as a broad or a loose constructionist philosophy. And that refers specifically to the Constitution. And what that means is they believe that they can broaden federal power and kind of stretch federal power to accomplish goals within the government. So they're going to get their inspiration from the Constitution itself. They use it as evidence that says, yes, the Constitution backs up our view of the Constitution. So what you're looking at here is Article 1, Section 8. And this part of the Constitution has two, I don't want to call them nicknames, but two terms that they use to describe it. So they sometimes refer to it as the necessary and proper clause, and other times they refer to it as the elastic clause. So if you read it here, essentially what it's saying is that it's giving the federal government the power to expand when necessary to carry out the execution of laws. So Hamilton and the Federalists kind of jump on this to say, like, here, it's right here in the Constitution. This is why we can create a national bank. This is why we can, expand the federal government to protect manufacturing. It's right here in the Constitution. So overall, when you look at the Federalist Party, they use the necessary and proper clause to justify their position. They want a stronger federal government, and they look to Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution to defend themselves. The Democratic Republicans, on the other hand, kind of want the opposite thing. They want a restricted federal government, a weaker central government, and they don't want the federal government to be able to expand their power. So the first question you have to ask yourself is, why do the Federalists want a federal government that can expand power and can kind of use this necessary and proper clause to carry out certain laws of the federal government, and why do the Democratic Republicans not want this? And I think it goes back to this two arguments we've been talking about in our class. This idea of country ideology, where the Democratic Republicans are fearful of an overpowerful centralized government. It's a carryover from dealing with the British and the tyrannical rule they felt like that they lived under King George III. So they're fearful of this. The Federalists are going to say, they're going to point to the Articles of Confederation, essentially, and say, like, look at what happened under the Articles. The federal government did not have enough power and therefore couldn't carry out everything that was necessary to make the government function and make our country a successful nation. Now, the Democratic Republicans, they're also going to point to the Constitution to defend their position. So the Democratic Republicans are referred to as strict constructionists. And their philosophy is that if a specific power is not delegated to the United States government, then it's a state power. So the federal government can expand power, they can't kind of manipulate and move power, because that allows for abuse within the federal government. And who knows when we're going to have a president that's going to expand too far and take too much power away. So they justify it by pointing to the 10th Amendment of the Constitution, which is a part of the Bill of Rights. And the 10th Amendment is pretty clear. If you look at it, it says the powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively. So they're going to say, here, it's right here in black and white. If it's not given to the federal government specifically, delegated to them, that's a state power. And so this disagreement begins, with Hamilton and Jefferson, and they're arguing about it in Washington's cabinet, and then their followers are going to kind of form the first two political parties in American history. And that's going to be a part of American history, even though the Founding Fathers didn't want it to be a part of American history. It's going to kind of set the tone, and it's going to be a part of American history for, up until the present day. But those two political parties will be dominant in American history for the first 20, 25 years of our country. Now, the main thing that they're going to argue over is going to be Alexander Hamilton's financial plan. Hamilton comes up with these different ideas on how to fix the economic crisis facing America. And we're really going to go into a lot of detail with this when we do our Hamilton-Jefferson debates, but I'm going to briefly go through Hamilton's plan and kind of explain to you what Hamilton is thinking and why he created certain aspects of his plan. So the first thing that Hamilton is going to kind of come up with is he says that the federal government should assume the debts of the state. And what that means is that the federal government is going to take on the debts of the state and essentially relieve the states from paying their debt. Now, why would he do that? Because that's just going to add to the federal debt. His logic and his thinking is that he wants to consolidate the debts into one place and kind of act as one unified United States. Instead of different states paying off their debt on their own, he wants the United States to be able to do it. And in the process, centralize power to the federal government and kind of gain some more respect with foreign nations and people around the world. Second part of his idea is to place a tax on whiskey. And an excise tax is simply a tax placed on a product in order to kind of generate some revenue for the country. Now, this excise tax, why he picks whiskey? At the time, whiskey is the most popular drink in the United States, and Hamilton believes that by placing a tax on this, a small tax, you can generate some revenue within the United States and for the federal government. Now, it should start to click in your mind why there's going to be some resistance to this tax and resistance to other things. Remember, they're fresh coming out of being under British control. And so, to some Americans, this is going to feel eerily similar to the tea tax, the sugar tax, these other taxes that we talked about in the pre-Constitution, pre-American Revolution era. Third thing, most controversial aspect of Alexander Hamilton's plan is to create a Bank of the United States. Again, he thinks this is essential. Creating a bank to manage our finances, get our currency problems under control, help to pay off the debt, be a place for the American government to get loans from and to store its money and to house its money. He thinks this is essential to get the financial footing of the country on track. But of all the aspects of the financial plan, this one creates the most controversy and really the harshest and most divisive arguments take place over the national bank. And this argument does not die. It's another trend in American history. You're going to see them argue about the national bank after this. Under Andrew Jackson, they argue about it. Lots of different American presidents. It comes up in different eras in American history. People are mistrustful of the national bank. And even today, there are different political parties who are mistrustful of the national bank, and segments of different political parties that are mistrustful of the way that they have power and the way they manage things in American society. All right, the last big aspect of Alexander Hamilton's financial plan is to support American manufacturing and promote American manufacturing. And the way he wants to do this is he wants to put protective tariffs on foreign products to promote people to buy American-made products. So those are the four big aspects of Hamilton's financial plan. On Monday, what we're going to do is some of you are going to take on the role of Hamilton, some of you are going to take on the role of Jefferson, and you're going to try and flesh out these arguments, because these arguments on both sides are really the essence, the foundation of political parties in America. And the Democratic Republicans have one perspective. They represent one segment of American society. The Federalists have a different perspective. They represent a different segment of American society. And this is key. Like I said, key to understanding the early republic, the early American society. Okay, so what you guys are going to do as far as your assignment, I'm going to post it as part of the assignment, but you're going to try and basically analyze parts of Hamilton's financial plan. And we're going to stop our screencast here. So I'll see you guys tomorrow, and good luck with your assignment.